Consider this, a program of issues and information behind today's news.
They don't understand if it was a natural disaster in Nebraska, everybody would be rallying around. But our kids are Nebraska's natural disaster, and they need the help now.
Begging for help, families like Becky Buttons gather at the state capitol Wednesday, supporting the Cannabis Compassion and Care Act. Buttons' 4-year-old daughter Alice has epilepsy.
We've tried multiple pharmaceuticals. Right now we're only on a rescue medicine. She's still having seizures.
The bill that would allow those with debilitating conditions access to medical marijuana is stuck in committee, and there's just over a month left in the session.
If it comes out so late out in committee that it never makes the floor for debate, they've essentially killed us for another year. And I'm not standing for it, so I'm pretty hot. I'm pretty agitated about it.
Meanwhile, families of those suffering from seizures say they're counting on our state leaders to do their job.
I really believe that if we spent as much time working, all of us working together to get something solidly airtight, we could do it and help a whole bunch of people in this state.
That bill may have been tabled until 2016. However, the debate continues. Hi everyone, I'm Kathy Wyatt. Welcome to this week's edition of Consider This. Our topic, Unicameral Youth Legislature. Joining us to talk more about it are Heidi Ewing, Program Coordinator, Senator Sue Crawford of Bellevue, and Nick Kohler, a high school student from Omaha. He received the Freshman Standout Award. Welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for being here.
Thanks.
Heidi, I'm going to start with you. Briefly walk us through the history of the Nebraska Unicameral.
Well, Kathy, as you may know, just like any other state, Nebraska started out with a 2-house bicameral legislative system. So that worked from 1867 up until 1937. What changed here in Nebraska is that we had the work of a man named Senator George Norris. He was a U.S. Senator serving Nebraska not at the state level but at the congressional level. He served in both the House and the Senate. And those years of experience really gave him a taste of what the bipartisan or bicameral system looked like, what partisanship looked like, and he became very frustrated with what he thought were inefficiencies in that system. And as a Nebraskan, he was from McCook originally, he wanted to show how Nebraska could be an example to the rest of the states about how a legislature could be run more efficiently. So he rallied support. Legend has it that he wore out 2 sets of car tires driving around the state trying to galvanize support for this measure. And eventually voters gathered signatures, put the measure on the ballot, and the voters supported a constitutional amendment to change from a bicameral system to a 1-house legislature. So we first convened as a 1-house legislature in 1937.
Wow. All right, thank you for that. So Senator Crawford, we fast forward to present day. What's important for us to know about the 104th legislature?
Well, I think that Senator Norris would be very proud of the 104th legislature. In addition to the inefficiencies that he saw in a bicameral legislature, he was also very concerned about the partisan nature of legislatures. And so he fought very hard to make sure that the reform was not just to a unicameral legislature, but to a non-partisan legislature. And he argued that if we had a partisan legislature, that quite often at the state level, we'd be debating issues that were important to the national parties. And so he wanted to be a non-partisan state legislature, much to the chagrin and disappointment of his Nebraska Republican colleagues. But he persisted and said, this is very important. We want the senators to be able to focus on the issues that are important in Nebraska. I think that is what we saw in the 104th legislature. There were people getting immense party pressure, and the senators stepped up and made choices that they thought were best for the state of Nebraska.
Very good. What would you say to be 1 or 2 of the greatest successes of the session?
Well, the issue that got the most state, national, and international attention was the repeal of the death penalty. And I believe that was an issue where the fact that we were a nonpartisan unicameral meant that we could really spend time on that issue and get to understand it, and also get a chance to hear from people in our districts and what their concerns and questions were. And so that was an issue that passed, the repeal of the death penalty, as it did in the youth unicameral as well. The other issue that I would say was an important success that doesn't get very much attention is that we passed a balanced budget. So at the end of our session, we passed a balanced budget with controlled growth spending, and 25 other states were still struggling to figure out how to balance their budget. And we were able to balance the budget and have a couple of very sizable long-term investments in higher education, especially for healthcare. And have an opportunity to invest in some other bills that we felt were important to the session, and got all that done with a balanced budget. And the governor's office and the legislature agreed on the budget, and so that was a very important success.
Very good. And what are you expecting then when you go back January 16th of 2016? That's just so odd to say, but what are you expecting?
I think the hot issue in 2016 will be school financing. So one of the issues that increasingly gets a great deal of attention is the issue of property taxes. And in many counties and communities, 60 to 70% of their property tax goes to school financing. And so I believe school financing will be a key issue, and that will also include discussions about the learning community. The learning community is a part of the school financing puzzle here in Douglas and Sarpy County, and so I expect those will be important issues we'll spend quite a bit of time on in 2016.
So curiously, if you're so willing to share, tell us about your journey to becoming a lawmaker.
Sure. Well, I grew up in a family that talked about policy at the kitchen table, so I'm sure that laid an important foundation. I grew up in a farm family, so we talked about ethanol and farm subsidies and trade, but my father was on the school board, and so I got a chance to see his involvement there, both how he could help this community by being involved, but I also saw there that it was sometimes tough. They had some tough issues that they had to address. Now, in our small rural community, there is no campaigning for the school board. If you are willing to do it, you generally get elected. So I didn't see the election side of it, but I got to see how he could be engaged and shape those policy issues. So, but after that, as many engaged citizens, I was only involved as an engaged citizen for many years, and I teach political science at Creighton University. And in that role, I'm very interested in policy and very interested in getting my citizens and my students engaged in policy. And so I was just really only involved in that way. And it wasn't until somebody asked me that I even thought of running for office. So I had a colleague at Creighton who used to actually be in the same seat that I am in now. And he was a professor of education at Creighton, Senator Hartnett. And he saw me at a Creighton event, and I thanked him for being my senator. And he said, "Do you still live in that district?" And I said, "Yes, I do." And he said, "Have you ever thought of running for office?" And I sort of laughed it off. I don't know. But he followed up, and that was the beginning of a discussion. And I talked to people who were in the job and decided it would be a good fit and decided to run.
You say that so matter-of-factly, and I just have to say that I think there are, I'm not going to say many, but there are some people who think about going down that path, but for one reason or another, they decide no. So when someone approaches you and says, "Hey, what do you think about this?" What did you think about it initially? Was it just something, yeah, I'd like to do that? What thought process has to occur to get you from this side to this side, right?
Well, I tell that story quite often because I think it's very important for people to realize that people don't just wake up one day and decide to run for office. Well, most people don't. And so one of our jobs as a citizen is to be on the lookout for other people that you think would be good public servants and ask them. And then they will probably laugh at you when you ask them. But do like Senator Hartnett did, ask them again. So he asked me to meet him for lunch, and then followed up and was persistent in talking to me about what he saw in me that he thought would make a good public servant. So I tell that story because it's really important for all of us to think about what we can contribute ourselves and who the other people are around us who would be good public servants. And what we know from political science is that the main reason we have so few women in politics is that too few women run. They're equally likely to win, they're equally likely to raise money, but just too few women decide to step out and run.
Interesting. Well, I'm wondering about this young man sitting to your right in terms of what his future holds. Nick Kohler joins us. Welcome, Nick.
Thank you.
All right, so curiously, before we talk about this 4-day event, which we will, what is it that you aspire to become?
Well, ever since I was a little child, I've aspired to become a doctor or a role in the medical field. My mom was a nurse at Children's Hospital from when I was 5 to age 10, and now she's a nursing teacher at Methodist College. And so I've been around the environment pretty much my whole life, and just when I step in there, it's just this completely different environment that amazes me. I now actually volunteer at Methodist Hospital once a week. I go deliver newspapers to patients, I fill out charts, I restock the cancer floors, and just something about being in the environment of a hospital really opens my mind to people that are sick or in need, and I really want to help them.
So if we were to fast forward in your life, I don't know, I'm thinking of medical school and all those other things now, many, many years, where would we find you, Nick Kohler, do you think?
Well, I would hope you would find me either as a surgeon or a doctor in the hospital that takes care of patients with all sorts of diseases or illnesses, just at a regular hospital, hopefully in a city as much just like Omaha.
Wow, Heidi, this impressive young man was one of many, right, who attended a very important special 4-day event this summer. Tell us about it.
Well, we at the Nebraska Legislature host a youth camp for students like Nick who are interested in learning more about public service, public speaking, public policy development. And students come from all over the state to participate in this legislative simulation that the clerk's office at the legislature hosts every summer. We partner with 4-H Youth Development and the UNL Big Red Academic Summer Camps program. And so we host these students. They live on East Campus and they're transported to the Capitol every day for 4 days. And we host them in the Warner Chamber, which is the historic Senate chamber that goes unused in the Capitol now that we've become a one-house legislature. So they have this unique opportunity to use the room that was actually designed for legislative debate that goes unused. And we teach them about the legislation that was debated the previous session, and we draft bills for them based on that, on what turned out to be the hot topics from the previous session. So the students introduce those bills, and we go through a series of public hearings just like the actual legislature does. The senator's staff serves as volunteers, and they come to these mock hearings and provide testimony. And so the youth senators are able to ask some questions, learn more about all these complicated issues that the legislature dealt with, and then we go back into the Warner Chamber and we start debate. And they learn about how to work with each other, how to compromise and negotiate, about the importance of collegiality as they are coming to decisions on our legislation. We go through 3 rounds of debate, just like the actual legislature does, and then we adjourn.
Wow. Senator Crawford, you were involved in this last year. Tell us about your experiences there.
Sure. Well, I was very proud that the Youth Unicam picked 2 of my bills to debate last year. So each year they pick actual bills that we debated, and they picked a few of them for the Youth Unicam. And so they picked 2 of my bills. So I had the chance to go and talk to the senators about my bill, and they asked great questions about it. And so I had a chance to talk to them about both bills that they were debating.
Wow. Heidi, who else would you like to point out who participated last year alongside Senator Crawford?
Well, Senator, at the time he was Speaker Adams. He's been term limited out of the legislature, but he was a frequent speaker to our students. As a former high school government teacher, he was a perfect person to speak to them. And he could talk about making that transition from teaching students academically about government to sharing his experience with them as a lawmaker. And so he's always an inspiring speaker also. In fact, he is a generous donor to our program and has funded 2 full-ride scholarships per year for students to attend.
Wow. What about this year? Who did you have this year that you want to tell us about?
That was Senator Tommy Garrett of Bellevue. He was our speaker this year, and he spoke on the bill that the students debated, which was LB 643. It was a bill to legalize medical marijuana use in Nebraska.
Okay, and Nick, you and Senator Garrett have a little something in common, right? So talk about that and you're meeting him and all of that.
Well, the first day we went to camp, we were given 3 bills to support and open, and I picked up LB 643 as my first bill just as a coincidence, and I started reading through, and it just amazed me. Being wanting to go into the medical field, I have heard about this bill in the news media or around the house even, and so I thought, I'm going to open with this bill. I'm going to take the leadership role, and I'm going to open in front of my colleagues. Senator Garrett actually came and spoke our second day about LB 643, and his testimony really inspired me. And I was scheduled to go before he spoke on the second day, but I pushed my time back so I could sort of convince my other colleagues to go along and support with me about this bill. And in my opinion, it was a smart idea because his speaking, along with mine, really opened others' eyes who might not have thought the same way as we did about legalizing medical marijuana.
So where did that thought come from, Nick? That's a pretty good idea, a pretty good strategic move, right? So when did that occur to you? And then, before I ask you that though, I want to back up. How many of these kids did you know when you went in?
I knew 0 kids.
Okay, so now we're talking about a tough issue, right? And you've got to convince some people. You're just meeting the senator, and there's a lot of stuff going on. So talk to us maybe first about the other students who were involved, and maybe then we'll catch up to how it was that you convinced them to do what they need to do.
Well, my first day there, we had some sort of icebreaker challenges. So we got to familiarize ourselves with other colleagues that was in our group. And I went up to almost half of the people there and introduced myself, tried to interact with them, make acquaintances. And by the time the first day rolled around, we all kind of stick together and helped each other out with the bills. Going back to what you said about how did I get the idea of Senator Garrett speaking before me, we were scheduled to open with our bills in a certain order, and my order happened to be at 11:30, and Senator Garrett was set to speak at noon. So I pushed actually to repeal the death penalty before Senator Garrett spoke, and then I spoke after our recess.
Very smart.
Why am I not surprised then that he won an award, Heidi? I'm listening to him, and I'm first of all, I'm thinking, I wish there was something like this when I was growing up. But he did win an award, and I would have asked him about it, but I thought I'd ask you, and then maybe we'll get his reaction to the award.
Yeah.
How does that sound? What's this award all about?
Well, the organizers of the camp like to recognize students who have shown leadership or consensus building capabilities sort of above and beyond the call of duty. That's what makes the camp move forward. That's what simulates the actual legislature for these kids in a very short period of time. It's all about that relationship building. And our young Senator Kohler over here displayed that from the get-go. He was willing to take on, as you said, a very complicated issue. I think it's true to say that most of the students were not on his side as we started the camp. And so as those 4 days progressed, he really had to work to bring them over to his side, to understand what is a very controversial issue. And he was able to get the bill passed ultimately, which sort of stalled in the actual legislature. So that's a major success for him.
Nick, you're going to be a sophomore.
Correct.
At Central.
Yes.
Where does this come from, right? So you have this presence, and you have a wisdom about you, right? And you're certainly someone who can, convince others. Have you always been this way? Where did you pick up those skills?
Well, I honestly don't recall, but I can just remember from as early as kindergarten. My family actually, so I was a very outgoing person, liked to make friends, liked to interact with others. And I can just remember in elementary school mostly, whenever we would talk or have debates, I would always be the first one to step up and acknowledge my opinion. I was never afraid to shy away. In 7th grade, my teacher, Mr. Kivarante, we would have very controversial issues, one of them being the death penalty. And during our English class, we would stand up there and take a side, and he made us speak. And I was very glad he did that. It really opened my mind to what others thought and what I thought and how I could persuade them into thinking my ways. And so this year in high school, we had debate teams, we had speech, and I was not involved this year because I was only a freshman. You mostly have to be upperclassmen to be in those groups. But I would still go to their meetings, like philosophy club. I went there and we spoke about just a variety of topics, and I really enjoy standing up and speaking for what I believe is right.
Okay. Let me ask you, Nick, of the 4 days, when you look back on that now, how did that experience change you moving forward here now?
Well, in the political aspect, I came into the camp not knowing much about what the Unicameral was all about. And then after just the 4 days, as you said, I feel like I know. I just feel like I know a lot. I know how the system runs. I know how the senators have to introduce the bills. I just know how the system works. And this camp really assured me that I can speak up, I can stand up, and I can talk for hours even, and get my point across and convince others and negotiate to pass whatever, or show my opinion, or convince others what I believe in.
Well, and I would imagine too, Nick, as a leader, encourage others, because the dynamic must have been across the board there, and you had some kids who came in wanting to learn and hoping for a great experience, right? But not quite as maybe outgoing or confident. And so did you find yourself taking on that role of almost a student mentor, for lack of a better term?
Yes, we actually, funny that you said that, we had 2 mentors, and I instantly became friends with both of them. Very nice people, and they were the most outgoing ones at the very beginning of the camp. They were the ones that organized the icebreakers, and they were the ones that got the students together and made them interact. And so I tried to follow in their footsteps and do what they did, but as a student aspect, not as a mentor. And I just kind of went through and spoke, talked to the others, made myself acquainted with them, helped them out. By the last night, we all were in one room together, just having a normal conversation. To some kids I didn't even know existed 3 days earlier.
Wow, what would you say to those people watching? You know, because folks are always looking for something, especially something productive, to be doing in the summer. So if we have some other, students out there watching, or maybe their parents or grandparents are watching, what would you say to get them to at least think about taking part in something like this that you haven't already said, Nick?
Okay, I would say if you like speaking, even if you don't like speaking, if you just like the government, or if you like how the state works, I would really recommend anyone to go. This camp is only 4 days. In my opinion, it was nice to kind of get away from, I live in Omaha, as you said, the big city life, and come down to Lincoln and sort of be in this general area for 4 days and interact with others. To those who might be thinking whether or not they want to, during the summer I get bored very easily, and so I really wanted something to do. And this camp, even though it was only 4 days, I will look back to the rest of my life. It really opened my mind to how others think, how the government runs, and how much fun it can be.
Senator, I can't imagine what you're thinking as this sophomore from Central High School is talking. Tell us what's going through your mind and heart right now.
Sure. Well, I'm very impressed because timing is very important, and so to have that insight to see that it would be better for the bill to be introduced after Senator Garrett's talk was very wise. So that's very critical. And also, personal relationships are absolutely critical. And so what happens, the people who are most effective are the people who are able to build good personal relationships. And so he clearly already understands that lesson as well. The other thing that I would say to both, that I admire about Nick's experience, and as an encouragement both to youth and to older folks who might want to run for the legislature, is that you don't have to know everything before you come. So when the youth come in, they have staff and hearings to help them learn about the issues. The same is true for those who run for office. You don't have to know all of the issues or know everything about the issue before you come. You learn enough to tell people and convince people that you can think and make good decisions. But when you get there, you have staff to help you understand these issues, and you have hearings so you learn about the issues. So you should know that whatever your background is, you come in and you make a difference. And it's so good to hear him talk about wanting to go into the medical field. And we see people at the legislature all the time who bring their profession to the table. There are senators from all these professions, and that's what makes our discussion great. And then other people who come to our hearings and talk about what that bill means to them as a physician that helps us make better decisions.
Yeah, I like what you're saying here, because I do think there are certain people who would be fantastic at doing what it is that you are all doing, but they're feeling intimidated, or they just don't know if they are the right fit. And I think too, there's some mudslinging that goes on, and people don't want to get in the throes of all of that. And so when you say you don't need to know everything, Senator Crawford, I'm going to put you on the spot.
All right.
What do you need to know? What kind of a person can feel open enough, right, and to want to at least explore that realm?
Well, I think a good first step is to talk to people who have the job. And that was what was very critical for me, is to talk to people who were senators. And I talked to some staff who saw what senators go through. And so then I could ask them what they felt were the most important characteristics, what they liked about their job, what they didn't like about their job. And so, for example, one of the concerns I had is a concern that many women have, that you won't be able to spend any time with your family once you're elected. So, but I had a chance to talk to people, and they said, well, no, we drive back and forth, and I am home with my family most nights. So part of that is having that discussion with people who are in the position that you might be seeking, whether it be the state legislature or school board or city council, and really talk to them about what the job really is. Because the public perception is that it's a lot of mudslinging, but I would say that's just very little of what the real experience is.
Okay, well, thank you for sharing that. Heidi, we've got about a minute. Moving forward, what's next in your world then?
Well, you know, from year to year, we have a lot of students returning for this camp. You know, they'll come for 3 years, age out of the program, and then we see their younger siblings come through. So I'm hoping to see a lot of the same students that came this year return next year, because it was really an excellent group, as you can see from our young Senator Nick Kohler here. But we always base our camp on the previous legislative session. So really, time will tell. I mean, once January hits, we always see those first 10 days of the legislature when they convene and they introduce new bills. We're always watching for ideas about, oh, we better keep an eye on that bill because I think it might be interesting for the students to debate this summer. So, you know, all the bills that Senator Crawford listed as big issues coming January are probably issues that the youth senators will be debating in June.
Fantastic. We're going to put up a website. So if folks want to learn more, they can go to the site, they could call you, whatever they feel comfortable doing. We've been talking about the Unicameral Youth Legislature. It's nebraskalegislature.gov/UYL. This has been fascinating. I want to thank the three of you very much for coming in and sharing your time, your expertise, and your experiences. Nick, thank you for your continued leadership on this program.
Thank you so much.
I will expect nothing but great things from you moving forward, Nick. Thank you very much. Best wishes to you.
Thank you.
You bet. And thank you all for watching. We'll see you next week.
Consider This is an issues and information program produced by UNO Television. More information can be found at unotv.unomaha.edu. If you'd like to share your comments about this show, call UNO TV at 402-554-2516 during regular business hours, or email us at considerthis@tvmail.unomaha.edu.